Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second episode of our three-part webinar with Richard Owen, one of the co-inventors of NPS. And today's topic is pretty interesting. It's about engaging the organization for CX outcomes. And I'm super excited again to have Richard back on the show. Richard has been super gracious with his time and a good friend of mine. And he's come back from, I guess, trips to Africa, Australia. Where else, Richard? Where else in the world are you going and teaching
Europe,
how to CX?
Europe, but yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm now the global teaching should be my job description.
There you go. So really quickly, brief introductions. I'm the founder here at QuestionPro, and we have a voice of the customer experience platform that we sell as part of our suite of offerings. Richard is a very good friend of mine right here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and also one of the co-inventors of NPS, as well as he ran a company called Satmetrics for quite a while that recently got acquired by Nice Systems, and he's been, I guess, teaching everybody how to CX. And I'm super excited and super glad to have you. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be back. I guess episode 1 must have gone over reasonably well because we have an episode 2. I feel like we're in the television business.
There we go. And slowly, both of us will kind of get to really like each other and actually do more stuff. But so jumping right into it, Richard, today we want to talk about not kind of the data collection piece, not the analytics piece, but we really want to talk about kind of the organizational engagement. And that's kind of definitely something top of mind in terms of, all the customers we talk to. And definitely you guys have a ton of experience. I mean, Richard, how many CX program implementations have you overseen in the last 10?
We think over 1,000.
That's a lot of experience. And today, Richard, you're gonna walk us through some like do's, don'ts, and interesting stuff that you've kind of gathered over these years. That's part of the agenda. And then right after that, we want to definitely, from the QuestionPro's perspective, we want to showcase, 1 or 2 features, tools, technologies that we've implemented very successfully to kind of, giving the tools and technology to enable organizations to collectively think about CX. So that being said, Richard, take it away and, educate us.
Well, thanks for that kind introduction, Vivek. And let me start by confessing that in the past, when I've heard about topics like employee engagement, my typical reaction has been to sort of roll my eyes and think of this as an extremely sort of calorie-light topic where we're all going to sit around and talk about how important it is for everyone to be motivated and, we really need to get behind the program and sort of maybe even sing Kumbaya. But I've never seen this being really approached in a particularly scientific way. And that's not to say that I don't think that there's a real problem here. It's simply to say that I think people have somewhat trivialized the approach to it. So we're going to try and give a couple of more foundational thoughts here for you to think about as you think about tackling this. And we're really going to cover this in sort of 3 ways. We're going to talk about the fact that thinking of engagement, it's important to understand that there's not a uniform approach that you would take to engage the C-suite versus perhaps, well, everyone else in the organization. There are very different perspectives. And if you're going to get engagement, often the problem is how do I get the senior leadership engaged? But recognizing that it's different motivations, different problems is an important step forward. The second thing is I do think you can put a structure in place and a process in place that actually enables you to engage employees. It is something that can be organized and tackled. And I think the third point I'd make is, like so many things, this can be done measurably, and those measurements can be linked to outcomes. This doesn't have to be a soft science where at the end of the day, we all feel better. It can be highly scientific, and you can actually quantify results. So with that, let me sort of dive in. Start with the obvious, and this is actually data that's partly pulled out of Gallup research, partly pulled out of Sloan Management Review. And I think it's 2 very relevant facts here. It won't surprise anyone that a relatively small number of employees think of themselves as being engaged by their definition in their work. And so there's a huge loss of productivity through lack of engagement in general. Furthermore, we all believe that innovation is what really drives the creation of value for the enterprise. And I think everyone would say, look, innovation is not just a top-down thing. We really need to get employees innovating or ideating, however you think about it. And a relatively small number of employees are generating all the innovation. Or put another way, if you don't capture the point of view of those 5%, you're getting nothing. You have to give that 5% the opportunity to create all the ideas. So the case for engagement seems pretty clear-cut. We're going to start with, let's talk about different groups. We're going to start with all employees, by which I really mean not the top executives. And we're going to talk a bit about how they tend to think of programs. And I'm going to set you up with one sort of foundational idea here. And that idea is that ultimately for these different groups, their ability to take action, and this is a slide I pulled right out of the masterclass, so it's perhaps a little complex for this format, but you can get the full slide in the masterclass. What it actually has is the notion that around the employee, they're going to respond to both social and economic norms, and I'll explain that in just a second. But whether they take action partly depends on whether they have the capacity to take action, the motivation to do something, the right incentive structure. And then having all those things in place means you can actually engage them in very prescribed processes, for example, closing the loop, very responsive processes where you get to put information in front of them that actually forms a response and gets them to do things, and triggers, which is a really valuable way of getting people to do things. You essentially create triggered events. But I'd like to zero in for the purpose of this presentation on this idea of social versus economic norms. And the simple way to think about this is that people do things for multiple reasons, but broadly speaking, there's a couple of big reasons. One is social norms. We do things because they're the right thing to do. These are sort of family rules, if you like. And companies have different sets of social norms. Often you think of this as culture. People also do things for economic reasons. In other words, we pay them to do it. So a sales rep who is compensated to sell systems, well, that sales rep is responding to economic norms. They have a very clear financial plan. Whereas, employees being perhaps good team players, well, they're not paid necessarily to be directly paid to be team players. It's a social norm within the company. We value team players. That distinction is important for one reason. Companies that are NPS leaders are typically leaders because their employees think of customer excellence, customer-centric behavior as a social norm, not an economic norm. In other words, we're not treating the customer right because we're being paid to do it. We're treating the customer right because it's kind of the family rules. And the other implication is that if you turn that customer treatment into an economic norm, in other words, if you say to employees, do it because we'll give you money to do it, you run the risk of actually losing the whole point of this. They will start to make economic trade-offs. They will start to decide whether or not it makes sense for them to treat customers well from a purely economic perspective. And that rarely results in good things.
Great. I think that's a very interesting point. I have a quick question over here. So are you then suggesting employee compensation that is linked to NPS is a bad idea?
I'm suggesting that employee compensation linked to NPS is a very blunt instrument. And if you do not establish customer centricity as a social norm, but instead it's simply about compensation, you'll be disappointed by the kind of behaviors you get from the organization. And frankly, the organization will be disappointed as well. Employees don't want to work in a place where doing the right thing for the customer is purely an economic equation. They want it to be part of the culture. And so I generally see compensation plans as being carefully chosen weapons that need to be very thought through. And honestly, Vivek, I would say 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. They're blunt instruments and they're used in a fairly sort of unwieldy kind of way. So if you had your choice, you might not want to do it at all. If you insist on doing it because you think in your organization that's essential, take great care that you don't destroy the underlying reason people are customer-centric in the first place.
Got it. That's a very, very kind of astute kind of point. I wouldn't have thought about it, but that's very astute.
So for employees, I think getting that established social norm, that sense that what we're going to do as an organization for our customers, creating promoters, not necessarily improving NPS, but creating promoters, avoiding detractors, is essential for employees, highly motivational for them. And they don't really care about what the company NPS score is, but they care about working in an environment where the company does great things by their customers. It's very motivational. And it, by the way, links to employee retention. It links to employee productivity. So these are good reasons to get this right. What about the C-suite, you may be asking by now? Are they the same? Well, I'm going to present it as somewhat of a different view of the universe, and hopefully you don't get too cynical around this, because C-suite quite logically is there to serve the shareholders. And at some level, they want an economic argument. If they don't believe that at the end of the day, there's a financial impact from creating promoters, not only will they not do anything to create promoters, but they shouldn't do anything to create promoters. It is, in fact, their responsibility to create higher share values. And so arguing with them that we're going to do it the right thing, but it doesn't make economic sense, is really a faulty argument. And there's a big challenge when it comes to getting C-suite to think about creating promoters and NPS. And I'm going to show you a really boring slide here, which is exactly the kind of slide that recovering economists like myself love. Lots of graphs. And all you need to understand is really the slide on the left here, which is the idea that people do something called hyperbolic discounting. And what that means is, in layman's terms, is they over-discount future. And we all do this every day, right? I know full well that I shouldn't have had that donut for lunch. I'm hyperbolically discounting its impact. I know it's bad for me in the long run, but it's really good in the short run. And so I'm discounting the future too much when I eat the donut. Now, what managers do is they tend to over-discount the future. They're too focused on short-term financial returns and not focused enough on long-term. And the key thing to understand is the argument for creation of promoters or detractors is a long-term argument. It's saying you will get money in the future, not in the present, and you correctly discounted, that should be worth a lot to you. You should create higher lifetime value. But that is against human nature. So we have to build economic arguments as to why this is a fact. And the tool we can use to do that is understanding lifetime value of promoters versus detractors. And this is not just a theoretical exercise. I've seen dozens of these analyses done. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish the value of a promoter to the enterprise over the lifetime of the promoter, establish the value of the detractor, and then obviously improvements in NPS are really just moving customers from one bucket to the other. So you know what it's worth to you. How do you calculate LTV? Well, if you're in a churn-based business, LTV calculations are relatively straightforward. You want to look at cost to serve, which is another core component to this, because cost to serve can vary a lot between promoters and detractors. But there's a hard metric here that can be calculated around lifetime value or lifetime revenue. Now, there's also a soft metric here called word of mouth value. And we all know word of mouth is powerful, very hard to quantify. What I've seen in the past is that people will make the case based on hard calculations, LTV, and word of mouth is kind of a bonus. So we know word of mouth is negative for detractors, positive for promoters. But however you look at it, you need to create a slide like this for your business that really quantifies the word of mouth. The full lifetime value, I should say. The other important thing to understand with executives is that at the end of the day, they're skeptical about data that is derived from surveying and NPS measures. They're used to very hard measures, financial measures, that really sort of have auditable performance, and they really understand gap standard reporting. So they're used to data that has that level of stability. And we often walk into rooms and say, well, we have this NPS data, and it's based on small sample sizes, and it's highly volatile. And executive teams typically go, I can't bet the business on that. So you need a real quality focus when it comes to building your NPS data. And there are good practices for that. I'm sure you're familiar with them. But I would emphasize for this audience, you're going to face skepticism unless you can demonstrate that the data is really high quality and methodically thought through and stable. You've got more skepticism to overcome with this group than you might have with other groups. So that's the executive team. Really, the economic value and the quality of data are the two key things for you to sort of get right there. So I also suggested that team structure was potentially part of the solution. And I think that I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One of the things we sort of advertised in the promo for this was the power of influencers within the organization. And there's lots of things you can do in terms of organizational structure for teams. I just want to zero in on this issue of influencers because it's actually more powerful than people often realize. Really successful programs build networks of advocates within the organization. And these are people who are not full-time engaged in running programs to create customer experience. They are participants from different functions, and they are most effective not when they're senior people, but when they're people who are close to the coalface, if you like, close to the employees who are actively engaged in creating promoters or detractors. They are believers. They are enthusiastic volunteers, in fact, in most instances, and they advocate for the success of the program and the initiative and act as a two-way conduit. Most organizations would want these people in lots of different geos and functions, so they become an informal network of communication backwards and forwards. And if it all sounds a bit soft and perhaps not very scientific, for most employees, hearing from people who look like them and fill similar positions to them is a really effective way for them to believe in the power of the program over and above just hearing it from leadership and executives or some staff function that's running the program. So this network of advocates is very powerful, and you want to put that in place if you're really going to bring the whole organization along. It's a very effective engagement technique, and it's actually very inexpensive.
Richard,
by the way,
I do have a question.
Sorry.
I do have a question here. In terms of team structure, are you then advocating for creating some sort of like a CX working group that is that is across multiple functional areas, multiple geographic areas, and create like a cross-functional working group for customer experience? Is that something you've seen that is working? How do you see that working for kind of transnational, geographically dispersed environments?
Well, that's a great question. There's two dimensions to that. And I have on this chart here, it says governance models, which is something we cover in the masterclass, but I'm not covering here today necessarily. Maybe it's an opportunity for another webinar. There's two dimensions to your question. One is, how do companies govern programs that are across large, complex organizations with multi-geos and multi-business unit structures, right? And some companies try and highly centralize that and sort of try and treat it like it's a sort of command and control system from the center. Others sort of massively decentralize and say, okay, every business unit just go off and do your thing. Neither solution seems sustainable. The best way to approach governance is to think of it like a function like finance. Somebody centrally sets the rules, establishes the processes, and those rules and processes aren't flexible. How you're going to do it and how you're going to measure it and report it isn't the choice of different geos and regions. But how you achieve results belongs to the geo region product line. And in that regard, the central team becomes a supporting team, a problem-solving team. They bring expertise in helping people understand data and improving NPS. They're not there to directly control the outcomes. That kind of sweet spot structure works well for governance. Now, you raise another question, which is about multifunctional teams. Short answer for that one is that for most companies, solving the customer experience equation is an exercise in solving a journey problem, which is a multifunctional problem. And you can't solve that by looking at the problem functionally. So again, we could talk a lot more about this, but it often comes down to pulling together teams of people who will take a customer journey view as opposed to a functional view so they can optimize for that journey. And that's a big and important idea.
And so if I can really quickly, if I can jump in. So effectively what you're talking about is like a federated model, like a little bit of governance from the central system, and then enough independence into the business units so that they can actually make changes to the metric effectively. So it's not a free for all, but basically
absolutely
federated model of sorts, right? It's partially controlled from the mothership, if you will, and then yet enough flexibility at the ground level in each of the business units to actually execute on certain kind of changes that they want to make.
Absolutely, and I think that federated is a great way of expressing it. It's, again, you wouldn't have the finance department say, oh, you can create your own definition of revenue.
Right.
At the same time, you wouldn't say the finance department say, well, we're entirely responsible for generating the revenue. You'd say,
correct.
no, we define what revenue is, but you as a business unit make it happen. And we as a finance department will provide financial analysts to help you figure out how to understand your business. That's exactly the right model to make work.
That's great. That's great.
So we also mentioned, and I said at the start that we talk about measurement here, and I think that the important thing to understand about measurement is that there's no reason why you can't scientifically assess the degree to which your employees are engaged and the degree to which those engagement performance indicators actually link back to NPS performance and ultimately corporate performance. And so we have a framework that's been built out here. And one of the things that is proven over time is that you can actually measure the degree to which your employee base is engaged and the degree to which, in fact, they are customer obsessed. And we use the term customer obsessed here simply because this is a terminology that resonated with employees, certainly in Anglo-Saxon countries. And we found that if you measure scientifically the degree to which employees feel they have shared purpose with the company, a sense of community and culture, a clear process by which performance is measured and improved, structured development programs and rewards and recognitions, but very specifically tied around how these link to customer experience. If you put that measurement framework in place, then essentially you can clearly quantify the degree to which your organization is customer aligned. You can benchmark performance over time, and you can identify areas where your organization is both unaligned with these objectives and also needs additional assistance. And so I started by saying a lot of employee engagement is calorie light. I think what we're trying to do here is turn it more into a science where it's quantifiable and it links to performance. And I'll say one more important point around that. Convincing C-level executives that employee engagement isn't just a concept, it's an absolute substantial business opportunity, requires you to have a quantification mechanism. You need to be able to measure it, and you need to be able to link that measurement to economic performance. And that's what you can do by measuring on these dimensions. And we can probably publish more around this if we want Vivek to give people a sense of how this could be implemented in a product like QuestionPro. I think it's an absolutely achievable result for most companies. So there's a real necessity to actually go ahead and figure out how to quantify the impact here.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for those insights. And at QuestionPro and Owen CX, we've kind of come up with a few kind of best practices, as you can see on the screen, in terms of pushing the envelope throughout the organization. But what I want to do is to talk about two specific things that Richard talked about that I think are relevant. He talked about measurement and metrics, and then he also talked about two things, right? We talked about prescribe and respond. And we all collect data, obviously at QuestionPro, we're in the business of collecting data to improvise CX, not just for the sake of collecting data and reporting to boardrooms. So, two things that we kind of espouse as part of our platform are what we call the closed loop and the smart loop solution. So what is closed loop? Let's kind of dive right into it. So the idea here is to make sure that when customers respond to you, you close the loop with the customers effectively. And I don't have to say this, but tons of research has been done around the act of listening and responding to customers itself creates, loyalty, itself creates this notion that, the company really cares about it, okay? And, when you close the loop, you force, people within your organization to actually talk to the customers that have been affected by a bad situation and really understand the situation, and therefore at some point can rectify the problem, both at a kind of individual level and at a structural level. And that's what the second component is, what we call the smart loop, which is taking the problem and kind of fixing it at a structural level. And like we said, like we don't believe the kind of the response to response to customer experience, kind of good or bad, should be, simply should be more than just a phone call. And we believe we have some systems in play. We believe companies that implement systems that are beyond just a phone call to come back and say, look, we heard you, and here's what we are doing to fix your problem. But also organizationally, here's what we are doing to fix the problem so that it doesn't appear in the future, or here are some new ideas that we can implement as we go along. So going a little bit nitty-gritty around this, right? So collecting data for the boardroom is one example, but collecting data for operational reasons to make sure that line level managers have the data in the right place at the right time is becoming, clearly paramount if you want to engage the entire organization. If you want to engage everybody within an organization, you got to give them data. You got to give them impactful data, and you got to give them actionable data. So we very strongly propose this idea around closed loop process, where if a ticket or some sort of system gets created, and the right stakeholders are linked to that ticket, they know that it's been created. They know a customer has either given them a negative or a positive review, and they can engage with the customer, and they can change it. And more importantly, and equally importantly, I would argue, have a system and a process in place to organizationally, from a structural perspective, collect the data and collect those experiences and make sense out of it. This is just a quick example of what we do here at QuestionPro in terms of ticketing. With every survey, every response to a survey, depending upon how you want to structure it, you can have a closed loop process for promoters. You can have a closed loop process for detractors. It's not typically, I would argue, closed loop has been associated with detractors, but we've done projects with customers where they've collected all their promoters and put them in a customer advocacy panel. And you can have a separate process, a workflow around promoters, and frankly, a separate workflow around detractors, and actually manage that system. So now you have, not only are you stopping the bleeding, but definitely amplifying the guys who are really excited with you. And in terms of best practices, operationally, there's lots of ways to handle bad or effectively unhappy customers, but we're not and obviously we don't have to go through that in detail, but here's some of the best practices we've come up with in terms of really reacting in speed to customers, right? So we have tons of data around reacting to customers within 24 to 48 hours. It in itself solves 80% of the problem. The fact that you reacted to it, that itself creates advocates from detractors. People who are responding to you are clearly who are unhappy with you, are clearly unhappy for a reason, and if you can respond to that in real time, and today data is available in real time, and then you can really convert those passionate detractors into passionate advocates for yourself. But again, running closed loop systems is not necessarily the only you can definitely put together a call center, get the data, et cetera, et cetera. However, they still fail, partly because no one else within the organization is aligned to this process. And that's where we came up with this idea of the smart loop, where what we are suggesting right now is, as you collect the data, you can assign issues to internal stakeholders. And this is where you're trying to engage the different folks, like Richard talked about. There are, customer experience is a multi-function problem. It's not just one particular function can solve it, right? So if you are, just take an example. If you are getting double billed for something, the call center will take in a call saying that, hey, I got double billed for something, because it's some issue in our e-commerce platform that is doing it. So the only person that can actually fix that problem are the folks in the e-commerce team, not the customer experience team. The call center guys, all they can do is issue a refund. So there's a process for issuing a refund for double billing. Great, we did that. But how do we actually solve the problem, right? In order to solve the problem, well, clearly, the e-commerce team that is stored within IT, they are the guys who can actually go in and fix the problem. So it's a technology problem that is, that's a bug in the system that, double bills certain customers in certain scenarios, right? Let's take that as an example. And but what we, as a system, the call center is handling the problems, right? So the call center really cannot fix the problem. So the stopgap measure is, okay, look, you know what, if somebody calls in with this issue, let's issue a refund. However, with our smart loop system, what we do is we kind of do an internal mapping of the organization, and then our frontline employees are kind of allocating tickets to each of the different components of the organization. So in that way, at the end of the month, end of the year, end of the quarter, at any point of time, we can have a data-centric view of all the issues that have been coming in based on internal organizational structure, not based on customer input, but basically based on internal organizational structure. So that gives you a clear view of how we can not only kind of like take the data in, but also kind of allocate use to the different departments within an organization. This is an example of like, look, you know what, we have different departments that you can set up and different functional groups within each of those departments. And then now you can say, like, when I'm responding to a ticket, when I am having an issue, I allocate that ticket to one of these, I allocate the root cause of this to one of these departments and one of these functional business units or functional units within those departments. So once we do that, and we also have a pretty nifty mechanism of kind of doing what we call a +1, which is like, you've seen the issue come multiple times. This is what, frankly, people on the front line say, like, yeah, we know this is a double billing issue. We know that this is the e-commerce double billing issue. We have a process for issuing a refund around this. But let me do a +1 on that issue. So that gives, again, we are kind of very data centric. We believe in data, and that gives us, especially the customer experience team, very hard evidence to go back to the IT team, to the technology team, and say, look, guys, we've had 75 requests, of the same type in the last 2 months for the same issue. Can we fix this? Because that's a journey, like Richard earlier on said, customer experience is a journey, multi-function journey problem. So you need to kind of go to the right stakeholders. You need to go to the right departments within the company to actually solve the problem, right? So that's what the smart loop process really does for us. And it has, frankly, worked, a simple thing like having just allocating tickets to different business units and different organizations. And you can, within the system, you can set this up any way you want, depending upon, your company's org structure, has enabled our clients to get, distinct insights into where the root cause of the various journey problems are. And then you're armed with this data. You can go back to the teams and say, like, look, this is what we need to do. And you have quarterly meetings and say, like, let's do a quarterly review of all the feedback we've got, and internally allocate it and say, like, look, it's a double billing issue that's absolutely crushing us and killing us. And we need to get back to the tech team and say, like, this is the finance, the credit card team or the API, the credit card API is not working correctly. And that is the root cause of this problem. And we need to fix that. To get that insight, we need to kind of, we have set these things up, and this has kind of, this enables you to engage the entire company in at least the different parts of it, maybe not the entire company, but definitely different parts of the company to fix that. And the final thing that I want to talk about is really kind of, not only collecting the data, but making, like I said earlier on, getting the data to the right place at the right time. And the other part that, our mobile app, the QuestionPro mobile app for CX, really kind of, we drive the data back to the line managers. And this is, again, getting everybody involved in the CX data collection process, and not only collecting the data, but disseminating the data correctly to line managers. So this gives like line managers a quick view of what's going on with their universe. So if you are a branch manager, or if you are in charge of a particular airport and people are giving feedback for that airport, obviously you only care about that airport, or you only care about your own store. And you have a real-time view of, as the data comes in, a real-time view of your universe, and that is mobile first and mobile enabled. So that gives, again, getting that data out to the right place at the right time. So these three components, we believe, kind of fit along with what Richard was talking about earlier on, in terms of like truly finding different pockets within the organization to give them the tools so that they can action things and execute better. So that's what, that's in a nutshell what we have. We want to talk a little bit about two kind of things that we're giving away as part of this 3-part webinar series. Richard has graciously kind of agreed to give away some, definitely, complimentary access to the masterclass, the training deck from Owen CX. And on our side, on QuestionPro, we definitely, we kind of expanded our kind of offering to a pilot program. Anybody wants to try out our CX platform for pilot for 3 months, happy to kind of, have people do that. Just email us at, you've seen the emails in front of you. You can email success@OwenCX as well as cx@questionpro.com, and we'll be happy to kind of, go through that process with you. Richard, back to you. Let's talk a little bit about Masterclass and tell us a little bit about the organizational alignment for the Masterclass.
Thanks for that, Vivek. And I think that a lot of what you said, I think, is very sound thinking in terms, especially in terms of, I think, about getting the right information to the right parts of the organization, because ultimately, as we said, you can't really start to get action until people understand how they play their role in the context of the overall customer experience. And data goes a long way to shaping that. Masterclass has been our most recent release of what has been, I think, over time known as Net Promoter Certification, and arguably one of the most successful programs in education, professional education, with over 6,000 companies have taken part in the Masterclass. And the version that almost everybody took part in was the one in the middle here, which was really designed for professionals who are running Net Promoter programs. And that's about two days worth of training content compressed into the online program. It's occasionally delivered live. As I said, it's been gratifying just what a big take up over the years that has been. But the latest version is now available online in the form of the Masterclass. But there's 2 other variants to that. One is the executive team, which is really based around a 4 or 5 hour working session with the top 20 leadership of the company. And that's highly customized and targeted to that business. And as you can imagine, is less about how you build programs and more about why you should build programs, the economic foundation for success. And in particular, engaging a debate amongst the senior leadership of the team around how they believe they can create a customer-centric driven company and get economic benefits from NPS. So you talked about a lot of travel personally. That's a class I teach personally myself, so I tend to find a lot of commitments to engaging in those particular sessions. But arguably the most impactful product in the Masterclass series is the new one that's coming out, in fact, in the next few weeks, which is based on the idea of training every employee in the organization. And that's been a particular challenge for us because to communicate the core ideas in a really succinct and simple way is actually quite challenging. So we'd done a previous iteration of that product and rolled it out to a pilot company with about 5,000 employees trained, learned a lot from it. This is the new version, and it's available in about 1 hour's worth of education comprising of a series of video components and some light testing and content around that. And so it's designed to be put on the LMS of learning management system, I should say, of large organizations, or access to our own learning management system. And so now you can essentially get the executive team, the professionals, and the entire employee base talking a similar language around Net Promoter Success. And we think that's a key element for getting alignment, is everyone has the same language. So that really sort of ends my remarks, Vivek. Not sure if you want to add any closing thoughts, but I'm certainly looking forward to the next session as well. And as ever, as you said, if there's any questions, people should feel free to ping us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Richard. And as you kind of dovetails into our next our pitch for the next session, we're going to talk a little bit about predictive analytics. We're going to talk about a little bit of machine learning, a little bit of what data has been collected based on that. So so this is something that definitely Richard, being a data geek, is definitely in line, and definitely from a technology perspective, we've done a bunch of things along these lines that I'd like to love to showcase. But that's for the next one. So we will see you guys around for the next one. Thank you so much for coming. Richard, thanks a lot for joining us today again.
Thanks a lot.
All right. See ya.